It may not look like the face of terror, but behind his round glasses stood the man who built the Nazi machine of death. Born in 1900 into a strict Catholic family, he grew up disciplined, bookish, and obsessed with order. Though physically weak and rejected as a soldier in World War I, he craved significance and found it when he joined Hitler's movement in the early 1920s. By 1929, Hitler placed him over a small paramilitary guard unit called the SS. Under Himmler's rule, that force exploded from a few hundred men into more than 250,000 devoted fanatics in black uniforms. He shaped them into Hitler's most feared tool. It was Himmler who created and expanded the network of concentration camps, starting with Dachau in 1933. By the end of the war, these camps became the stage for genocide, the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable. He wasn't just an administrator, he micromanaged brutality. He oversaw the Einsatzgruppen and death squads, mass shootings across the East, and later the systematic gassing programs. He spoke coldly of extermination as if it were a duty, trying to make mass murder sound normal. To Hitler, Himmler wasn't more than a servant, he was a pillar of loyalty. So trusted that by 1943, he controlled the SS, the police, the Gestapo, and later parts of the army itself. Few men held such sweeping power. Yet in 1945, as the Reich collapsed, Himmler tried to secretly negotiate peace with the Allies behind Hitler's back. When Hitler found out, he was furious, calling Himmler a traitor. Soon after, British forces captured him. Facing trial and certain humiliation, he swallowed a cyanide capsule and died at age 44. Himmler's legacy is one of cold bureaucracy turned into mass murder. He showed the world that genocide doesn't just need angry mobs, it can also be carried out by quiet men with files, meetings, and chilling efficiency. His name remains forever tied to the machinery of the Holocaust.
Joseph Goebbels, the master of Nazi propaganda. It wasn't a general, but he was just as deadly with words as others were with weapons. Born in 1897 in Germany, he grew up sickly, walks with a limp, but his sharp mind and fiery tongue gave him power that far outweighed physical weakness. Goebbels joined the Nazi Party in 1924 and quickly became Hitler's loudest disciple. He idolized Hitler almost like a messiah, describing him as the man who gave his life meaning. This devotion earned him appointment as Minister of Propaganda in 1933, once the Nazis seized control. From that office, Goebbels became the voice of the regime. He seized newspapers, radio, film, and rallies to shape every German thought. His mantra was simple: repeat a lie often enough and it becomes truth. He spread anti-Semitic myths, glorified Hitler as Germany's savior, and painted World War II as a holy struggle. Goebbels masterminded events like the Nuremberg Rally in 1934 and orchestrated Kristallnacht, the 1938 pogrom that smashed Jewish businesses and synagogues. He infused culture, even movies, with hatred dressed up as entertainment. His influence reached tens of millions across Europe. As the war turned bleak, Goebbels didn't waver. He pushed speeches of total war in 1943, urging Germans to fight with their last breath. Even as cities burned and children were drafted, his fanatic loyalty never broke. In Hitler's final days inside the Berlin bunker, Goebbels stood beside him. After Hitler's suicide in April 1945, Goebbels lasted one more day as Chancellor of Germany. Then, with chilling devotion, he and his wife murdered their 6 children before taking their own lives. Goebbels remains history's warning that propaganda is not just harmless spin, it can enslave nations, stir hatred into genocide, and bind millions to evil. His voice didn't just echo Hitler's message, it amplified it to a roar that cost the world millions of lives.
Hermann Göring, Hitler's ambitious ace. He was also Hitler's flamboyant right-hand man, a World War I flying ace turned Nazi power broker. Born in 1893, he earned fame as a decorated pilot before politics pulled him in. By 1922, he joined Hitler and soon took command of the stormtroopers. After the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, Göring was badly wounded and fled abroad. Yet, when the Nazis clawed back to power in 1933, he returned stronger, rewarded as head of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force he built into a colossal war machine. Early Nazi victories in Poland and France owed much to his squadrons. But Göring's ambition always outpaced his capacity. He famously promised Hitler that his Luftwaffe could resupply German troops at Stalingrad, an impossible boast that ended in disaster and shattered German morale. He wrapped himself in luxury, parading in ermine robes, dripping with jewels, collecting stolen art, and indulging his massive appetite. For ordinary Germans, he became a symbol of corruption, nicknamed the Fat Reichsmarschall. Still, he officially ranked second in the Reich, named Hitler's successor in 1941. Yet, in Hitler's final rage-filled days, that same ambition betrayed him. Göring sent a message from Bavaria asking if he should take over leadership as Hitler lay trapped in Berlin. Hitler exploded with fury, accused him of treason, and stripped his titles. Captured by U.S. forces after the war, Göring stood trial at Nuremberg, unrepentant and still flamboyant. Convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, he was sentenced to hang. The night before his execution in 1946, he cheated the gallows with a cyanide capsule. Göring's story shows that in dictatorships, greed and vanity can rise as high as loyalty, but crash just as spectacularly.
Rudolf Hess, the lone flight for peace. He was one of Hitler's earliest and most faithful companions, a man so devoted he was nicknamed the shadow behind the Führer. Born in 1894 in Egypt to German parents, he served as a soldier in World War I before drifting into nationalist politics. In 1920, he attended one of Hitler's speeches and was instantly transformed. He followed Hitler with religious zeal, eventually becoming his private secretary, then deputy Führer once the Nazis took power. For decades, Hess basked in the comfort of proximity, close but never flashy. Then came 1941, when he shocked the world with one of history's strangest solo missions. Without orders, Hess climbed into a small Messerschmitt aircraft and flew more than 900 miles across the North Sea to Scotland. His aim? To negotiate a peace deal with Britain, supposedly to free Germany to fight the Soviet Union. It backfired completely. British authorities locked him in prison, dismissing him as deluded. Hitler, furious at the embarrassment, stripped Hess of all titles and erased his name from official records. Inside Germany, he was written off as unstable, even mentally ill. For the next 46 years, Hess lived behind bars, first in England, later in Spandau Prison in Berlin, becoming its last and solitary inmate. In 1987, at age 93, he died there, officially ruled a suicide by hanging, though conspiracy theories linger. Rudolf Hess's story shows not loyalty betrayed, but loyalty misapplied, a man who worshipped Hitler so blindly that he went rogue on a fatal diplomatic fantasy. In Nazi history, his flight is remembered less as heroism and more as tragic absurdity.
Albert Speer, the architect who built Hitler's war machine. He was proof that brilliance can be twisted toward destruction. Born in 1905 into a wealthy German family, he studied architecture and was drawn into politics after hearing Hitler speak in 1931. Speer's designs instantly caught Hitler's eye. Grand, imposing visions for rallies, monuments, and plans for a rebuilt Berlin. Hitler, obsessed with architecture, saw in Speer not just talent, but a kindred spirit. That bond gave Speer extraordinary access and trust. When war began, Speer's role shifted from buildings to bullets. By 1942, he became Minister of Armaments, responsible for keeping the German war machine alive. Under relentless Allied bombing, Speer reorganized industry with ruthless efficiency. At his peak, arms production nearly tripled, even with Germany crumbling. But behind the statistics lay suffering. Speer's empire relied heavily on forced labor.
Millions of prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates worked under brutal conditions to fuel his output. His efficiency was built on human misery. After Hitler's suicide, Speer claimed loyalty to the end, but admitted he contemplated assassinating Hitler himself by planting nerve gas in his bunker ventilator, a plan he abandoned. At the Nuremberg trials, unlike most Nazi leaders, Speer admitted guilt for war crimes, though he denied knowledge of the Holocaust, a claim historians dispute. Sentenced to 20 years, he served his term in Spandau prison, then wrote best-selling memoirs, portraying himself as the repentant Nazi. Speer died in 1981, remembered as the polished face of the regime. His story warns of how intellect, when blinded by ambition, can make evil appear orderly, even respectable.
Martin Bormann wasn't flashy or famous like Göring or Goebbels, but few held more influence in Hitler's final years. Born in 1900, a World War I veteran and early Nazi member, he carved a career not through speeches, but through paperwork. By 1941, Bormann rose to become Hitler's private secretary. It sounds minor, but he became the gatekeeper. Every man, every message, every appeal had to pass through him to reach Hitler. In practice, he controlled access to the Führer and, over time, shaped policy by deciding what Hitler heard. Hitler valued his relentless loyalty and administrative skill. Bormann handled finances, controlled appointments, and even managed Hitler's private life, including his relationship with Eva Braun. Fellow Nazis despised him, calling him manipulative, but they couldn't bypass his power. He grew fanatically loyal, even harsher in Nazi ideology than many around him. By the war's end, Bormann's influence rivaled Göring's, though he preferred to operate from the shadows rather than the spotlight. As the Battle of Berlin collapsed in 1945, Bormann followed Hitler into the bunker. After Hitler's suicide, he tried to flee the city with other officials. Witnesses later claimed he was killed in May 1945 during the escape attempt, though his exact fate remained a mystery for decades, fueling countless rumors. In 1972, remains found in Berlin were confirmed by DNA as Bormann's. Bormann's legacy is chilling. You don't need charisma to wield power, only access. He reminds us that dictatorships aren't just shaped by loud voices, but by the silent bureaucrats who control the doors. Ernst Röhm, the power broker who crossed the line, was one of Hitler's earliest street-fighting allies, a scar-faced World War I veteran who thrived on violence. Born in 1887, Röhm helped Hitler from the very beginning, co-founding the SA, the brown-shirted stormtroopers who bullied opponents and turned Nazi rallies into battles. By the early 1930s, the SA had swelled to nearly 3 million men, dwarfing Germany's army. Röhm dreamed of merging them into a people's army under his command, where he would stand almost equal with Hitler. That ambition made him powerful, but also dangerous. To Hitler, Röhm was more than a comrade. He was a personal friend since the 1923 beer hall push. But jealousy and fear ran deep. Other Nazi leaders, especially Himmler and Göring, whispered to Hitler that Röhm's independence threatened the regime. It all exploded in June 1934, during what became the infamous Night of the Long Knives. Hitler struck first. Röhm and scores of SA leaders were arrested. Loyal once, Röhm refused to renounce his role. On June 30th, he was given a pistol in his cell to take his own life. When he refused, SS officers executed him. For Hitler, the purge cleansed rivals and reassured the army and elites that he was in control. For history, it showed Hitler's ruthlessness. Even closest friends were disposable in his pursuit of power. Röhm's fall is a reminder that in dictatorships, loyalty means nothing the moment you become a threat.
Eva Braun lived in the shadows of history, rarely seen but always near Hitler in private. Born in 1912 in Munich, she was just 17 when she met him while working as an assistant to his personal photographer. For years, she remained behind the curtain, never speaking in politics, never appearing in public beside him. Yet in private, she was his closest companion, offering the ordinary warmth that his circle of generals and ministers never could. She loved sports, laughter, even photography, and filled Hitler's retreats with touches of normal life.
Hitler kept her hidden, fearing that marriage or domestic life would damage his image as the untouchable leader devoted only to Germany. Still, Eva Braun endured neglect, long absences, and even attempted suicide twice when she felt ignored. But she stayed loyal, convinced she was meant to share his fate. In April 1945, as Soviet troops closed on Berlin, Eva Braun joined Hitler in the Führer bunker. And there, after more than a decade together, Hitler finally married her in a brief ceremony, his first and only wedding just hours before the end. The next day, April 30th, 1945, Eva Braun chose to die beside him. As Hitler shot himself, she took cyanide at his side. They had been husband and wife for less than 40 hours before their bodies were burned in the garden above the bunker. Eva Braun left no political legacy, no speeches or commands, yet her life is a chilling reminder. Even history's most monstrous figure was shaped by human relationships. She embodied the strange private world of an otherwise ruthless dictator.
Karl Brandt, the doctor who turned to death. It began as Hitler's personal physician, but he became infamous as one of the masterminds of Nazi medical crimes. Born in 1904, he was a trained surgeon and joined Hitler's staff in the 1930s. Hitler trusted him deeply, not only for medical advice, but for policy judgment. That trust placed Brandt at the center of the so-called euthanasia program, a sanitized term for mass murder. Starting in 1939, Brandt co-directed Aktion T4, which systematically killed the mentally ill, disabled children, and psychiatric patients. Gas chambers first tested here became the blueprint for the Holocaust. Brandt justified it as mercy killing, but in practice, it was state-sponsored medical genocide. Victims were selected by doctors signing forms, then gassed, injected, or starved to death. Tens of thousands perished under his oversight. Even as the war worsened, Brandt climbed higher, supervising medical research using camp prisoners in horrific experiments, testing new drugs, freezing endurance, even amputations. After Germany's defeat, his close ties to Hitler doomed him. Arrested by the Allies, Brandt was one of the main defendants in the 1946 doctor's trial at Nuremberg. He tried to argue he had acted on Hitler's orders alone, but judges rejected this defense. Convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, Karl Brandt was executed by hanging in 1948. His case left a lasting impact. The Nuremberg Code, new global rules demanding voluntary consent in medical research, was written in direct response. Brandt became the dark proof that medicine, without ethics, can turn healing hands into tools of mass killing.
Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's commando of daring. He was the kind of man Hitler adored, bold, theatrical, and loyal. Born in 1908 in Austria, he joined the SS in the 1930s and quickly impressed superiors with his size, over 6 feet tall with a dueling scar across his cheek, and his daring nature. Skorzeny's fame came in September 1943, when Hitler gave him a mission: rescue Benito Mussolini, who had been overthrown and placed under guard in Italy. Skorzeny led a glider assault on a mountain hotel, took the guards by surprise without a shot fired, and personally escorted Mussolini to safety. Hitler called it a miracle. Overnight, Skorzeny became a Nazi celebrity, hailed by propaganda as the most dangerous man in Europe. He wasn't done. Skorzeny organized sabotage, infiltration, and special operations across Europe. During the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, he led Operation Greif, commandos disguised in stolen American uniforms to create confusion. Though militarily limited, the deception spread panic among Allied forces. By 1945, while the Reich collapsed, Skorzeny remained fiercely devoted to Hitler. Captured by U.S. forces, he faced trial for war crimes, including unlawful use of enemy uniforms. But in a twist, he was acquitted, partly because even Allied testimonies admitted it had precedent in warfare. Remarkably, Skorzeny escaped captivity in 1948 and fled to Spain, living a comfortable exile under Franco's regime. He even became a military advisor abroad and survived as a larger-than-life figure until his death in 1975. Unlike many in Hitler's circle, Skorzeny outlived the Reich, remembered as the regime's swashbuckling commando, proof that dictators also reward spectacle as much as ideology.
Dietrich Eckart, the mentor who shaped Hitler's path. He isn't as famous as Himmler or Goebbels, but he played a crucial role in Hitler's rise. Born in 1868, Eckart was a poet, playwright, and political agitator in Munich, more of an intellectual troublemaker than a soldier. After World War I, he immersed himself in hard-right politics, anti-Semitism, nationalism, and mystical ideas about Germany's destiny. Eckart became a leading figure in the newly formed German Workers' Party, the group Hitler joined in 1919 that soon became the Nazi Party. Eckart immediately saw something in the young Hitler. He coached him in public speaking, promoted him inside Munich's nationalist circles, and introduced him to wealthy patrons. More than that, Eckart encouraged Hitler's role as a kind of chosen redeemer of Germany. Though his health was failing and his addiction to morphine was growing, Eckart remained influential in those early years. He was one of Hitler's true mentors, someone the future dictator openly admired. Eckart died in 1923, shortly after the failed beer hall putsch, at just 55 years old. On his deathbed, he reportedly said, "Follow Hitler. He will dance, but it is I who wrote the tune." Nazis later mythologized him as a visionary prophet, even dedicating Hitler's early book Mein Kampf to him. Eckart's impact shows that movements aren't shaped by one man alone. Even dictators are often molded by hidden mentors who pass them the torch of ideology. Eckart lit the fire that Hitler carried into history's darkest chapters.
Wilhelm Keitel, the loyal yes man. It was proof that loyalty without backbone can be just as deadly as fanaticism. Born in 1882 to a family of landowners, he followed a standard officer's career through World War I and remained in the army afterward. In 1938, when Hitler restructured the military, Keitel was appointed head of the OKW, the Armed Forces High Command. Though he held the title of Field Marshal, his true role was less a strategist and more a messenger. Soldiers nicknamed him Le Keitel, a pun that meant lackey. Keitel rarely challenged Hitler's decisions. When Hitler demanded invasions of Poland, France, or the Soviet Union, Keitel signed off. When Hitler ordered brutal policies, like the Commissar Order that called for mass executions of Soviet officers and Jews, Keitel stamped them with obedience. This blind loyalty made him indispensable to Hitler, who valued submission over independent thought. Other generals mocked Keitel's sycophancy, but his willingness to say yes transformed him into one of the regime's most powerful enablers. After Germany's surrender in 1945, Keitel was tried at Nuremberg. Unlike some co-defendants, he showed no defiance, only insistence that he was just following orders. The tribunal rejected this argument as inadequate. Convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, Keitel was sentenced to death and hanged in 1946. Keitel's story warns us of the danger not just of loud aggressors, but of silent enablers. Sometimes history's greatest crimes are signed into action not by zealots, but by obedient men who didn't say no.
Hjalmar Schacht wasn't a soldier or a propagandist, he was a banker. He was born in 1877 and rose through finance to become one of Germany's most respected economists after World War I. In the 1920s, he played a key role in stabilizing the crippled German currency during the Weimar Republic. When Hitler took power in 1933, Schacht became president of the Reichsbank and later economics minister. Though not a party ideologue, Schacht was vital in winning over German industry. His credibility reassured businessmen and foreign investors that the Nazis weren't just angry radicals, they had competent technocrats. Schacht engineered policies that cut unemployment, drove huge rearmament programs, and prepared Germany for war under the guise of recovery. Without his skill, Hitler's regime might have collapsed under economic weight before it ever gained full momentum. But Schacht grew uneasy as war aims escalated and SS brutality spread. By the late 1930s, he drifted from Hitler, opposing reckless spending and mass killings.
In 1944, after the failed assassination attempt on Hitler, Schacht was briefly imprisoned on suspicion of complicity. After the war, Schacht stood trial at Nuremberg but was acquitted of major crimes, one of the few close Hitler men to walk free. He later advised developing nations on economics, living until 1970. Schacht's story shows how dictators often rely on skilled outsiders to make their visions possible. Numbers, markets, and loans gave Hitler power long before guns and tanks.
Baldur von Schirach, the youth leader who indoctrinated a generation, he was born in 1907 into a family steeped in culture. His father was an opera director, but he turned his talents toward politics early, joining the Nazi Party at 18. By 1931, at just 24, Hitler appointed him head of the Hitler Youth. 1 year later, the Nazis seized power, and suddenly von Schirach was responsible for shaping millions of children. His mission? Indoctrinate Germany's youth into blind loyalty. Under his leadership, the Hitler Youth grew into an organization of over 7 million members by the late 1930s. Hiking trips, sporting events, marching drills, and propaganda lessons created not just social clubs, but training grounds for future soldiers and citizens loyal to Nazi ideology. Von Schirach publicly glorified Hitler as a living example for German boys and encouraged girls to dedicate themselves to motherhood for the Reich. Individually soft-spoken, he wielded enormous influence over an entire generation's minds. Later in the war, he was appointed Gauleiter of Vienna, where he oversaw the brutal deportation of tens of thousands of Austrian Jews to ghettos and death camps. After the fall of the Reich, von Schirach was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity. He was released in 1966 and lived quietly until his death in 1974. Von Schirach shows that the Nazi regime didn't just conquer through violence, it prepared the future by corrupting children, ensuring loyalty before they were even adults.
Julius Streicher was one of Hitler's most disgusting yet loyal friends, a man hated even inside the Nazi leadership. Born in 1885, he started as a teacher before hurling himself into radical politics. In 1923, Streicher founded Der Stürmer, a weekly tabloid devoted entirely to anti-Semitic filth. Its stories were lurid, obscene, and grotesquely exaggerated. Hitler tolerated it not because it was refined, it was the opposite, but because it poisoned millions of Germans with relentless hatred. Streicher was a master of crude propaganda. Posters, cartoons, and headlines from Der Stürmer were plastered across cities, teaching ordinary people to see Jews as dangerous parasites. His slogan seeped into everyday language and prepared the ground for mass persecution. Even within the Nazi elite, Streicher was despised. He was vulgar, corrupt, and shameless, notorious for abusing power in his Nuremberg region. By 1940, he was stripped of his official posts, but Hitler still protected him as a true fighter, indulging his old comrade despite his disgrace. After 1945, Streicher was captured and tried at Nuremberg. His defense, that he never killed anyone, only spread words, failed. Judges ruled his incitement had greased the wheels of genocide. He was sentenced to death and hanged in 1946.